Good evening. I'm Doreen Binder, co-president of the League of Women Voters of Portland, and I'm here along with Holly Schmidt of the Interfaith Alliance on Poverty. And we would both like to welcome you to our candidate forum this evening. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that works to help citizens make informed choices in elections. We do not endorse candidates or political parties, but rather we give voters the information they need to select a candidate. Membership information is available on our website and at the table at the back of the room, as is information on our co-sponsor, the Interfaith Alliance on Poverty. These forums are brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Portland through their education fund and through generous support from Metro East Community Media, Multnomah Bar Foundation, Paloma Clothing, Sarah Fruing Fund, and the Weiss Foundation. And in addition, we would like to thank Multnomah County for the use of this room. If you have not yet registered to vote, the last day to do so will be April 24th. You can contact the county elections office or register online through the Secretary of State. Ballots will be mailed out beginning on April 27th. And now I have the honor of introducing Holly Schmidt from the Interfaith Alliance on Poverty.
Thank you. I am Holly Schmidt, a member of the Interfaith Alliance on Poverty. We are 13 faith-based congregations in Portland, working together to address the root causes and systems that perpetuate the problem of homelessness and poverty. Change almost always begins with having effective, committed political leadership. And to that end, we have joined with the League of Women Voters to sponsor the candidate forum tonight and the 1 and 2 weeks on April 24th. Thank you.
We now turn to our forum for Portland Commissioner for Position 3. We will be together for approximately 55 minutes. I ask you again to please silence your cell phones, and a reminder that the broadcast for this is the property of Metro East, therefore no audio or visual recording, please. Thank you. I am your moderator, Linda Mather. 4 of the 6 candidates for the Portland Commissioner Position 3 are with us this evening for a discussion on civil discourse. Andrea Valderrama, Stuart Emmons, Loretta Smith, and Joanne Hardesty. Candidate Lou Humble did not respond to our invitation, and Felicity Williams was called to chair a neighborhood committee meeting this evening. The candidates are seated in a random order, and I will switch the responder following that same order for each round so that the candidates can take turns answering first. They will have 1 minute for openings, 1 minute for closing, and 1 minute for their answers. Timekeepers are facing the candidates with a signal for a 15-second warning and for a stop. Please finish your sentence, but not 5 sentences after that, okay? Good, thank you. All right, so let's begin with your opening statements, and Ms. I'm gonna really blank on it.
Valderrama.
Sardis, please, thank you for your patience.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Valderrama, and I am so happy to see so many folks here. I am running for Portland City Council Position 3, and I'm running because I see a new Portland everywhere around us. Those of us who have been here even just a couple of years ago remember something that has changed pretty drastically in a short period of time, and with those changes come new challenges or opportunities to make sure that we're addressing those changes. 3 of those opportunities I look forward to addressing as your next city commissioner include our housing and homelessness crisis, our transportation infrastructure, and jobs. I currently serve as a senior policy advisor in City Hall to the mayor and have been a senior policy advisor for the past 6 years, and also serve as a David Douglas School Board member in Outer East Portland in my 2nd term there, and most importantly, I'm a mom to a rambunctious 3-year-old.
Mr. Emmons.
I'm Stuart Emmons. I'm running for Portland City Council because our city needs a housing and planning expert to get us beyond this crisis. I'm an architect, planner, and innovator. For the last 20 years, I've worked with community groups on housing issues. There are solutions for people experiencing homelessness. There are solutions. Does this work? There are solutions for affordable housing for working families. We need someone with a proven track record delivering housing, and I'm that candidate. I will bring decades of real-world private sector experience to City Council, actually getting projects built and not just talking about them. Through neighborhood plans across the city, I have worked with local communities for years, finding common ground and making good things happen. And I've worked with the city bureaus for my entire career, and we know we can do things better.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Loretta Smith, and I'm running for Portland City Council Position 3 as a single mother and someone who's worked in this community for over 20 years. I raised my son here in Portland Public Schools. I know what it takes to make sure that we fight for the most vulnerable in our community. I think it's so important that we have someone who has that voice and who has used that voice and knows how to use the voice. Speaking up for seniors, speaking up for young people, someone who will take an equity lens on all the bureaus and say this is something that needs to happen. It's so important that you fight for youth employment. It's important that we fight for the homeless and people with home affordability issues. And I know that being on the City Council, I will be that person that will speak up and stand up to be sure that the prosperity that's happening in this city is happening for everyone in this city.
Ms. Hardesty.
Thank you. I want to thank each of you for taking the time to be here tonight, because this is a beautiful, beautiful day out there. I am the candidate that met with Dan Salzman because I thought we needed a new kind of leadership. I thought we needed bold leadership that was unafraid to ask the hard questions, unafraid to get into the details of why so many of our community members are not prospering. When I decided to do that, I did not do that out of arrogance. I did it out of desperation, because I had been banging my head on the walls at City Hall for the last 2 decades. It is important we have leadership that understands what's worked and what hasn't worked, and why we need a leader who is unafraid to challenge the status quo and will work for the people and not for special interests. I so look forward to your questions, and I thank you again for being here.
Thank you. And to our first question, and Mr. Emmons, you're going to start us off. Portland has a severe shortage of housing units affordable to our lowest income residents, a significant factor in the homeless crisis. What would you do to address this shortfall?
Well, first of all, I wrote the plan called the Portland Home Project that addresses 4,200 people in homelessness in 2 years, all tents and tarps off our street, all human misery off our street. And in 4 years, 75% of the people who are experiencing homelessness in housing. We have about 25,000 to 29,000 families in need of affordable housing. We just passed a $258 million bond, and wouldn't you think we would make a lot of headway on this affordable housing crisis? We are building 1,300 units with that our $258 million. That is not enough. We are going to nibble at maybe 5%. We'll have no visible change in our homeless population. I want to turbocharge our bonds. I've been working on innovation and lowering unit cost and getting more housing online, and that will be my focus.
Ms. Smith?
Could you please repeat the question?
Portland has a severe shortage of housing units affordable to our lowest income residents, which is a significant factor in the homeless crisis. How would you address the shortfall?
There's a couple of things. I think we need to help build a climate that would bring living wage, home-owning wage jobs to Portland. The second piece is I have a multi-program. I would extend that multi types of abatements to existing multiplexes. Today, we're spending $50 million above and beyond for homelessness and housing affordability. I would take half that money and start land banking, buying multiplexes, making sure that it is available for folks who are in the 30 percentile. The fourth thing is, we now have 989 brownfields in the city of Portland. I'd identify those brownfields where we're on transportation corridors so that we could build mixed-use housing for every level of those brownfields.
Ms. Hardesty?
Thank you for the question. I find it ironic that we're in a housing emergency, yet a California investor was able to identify a property on 39th Place and Southeast Holgate and purchase it after the owner died, and then give all 82 households eviction notices so that he could remodel it and then raise the rent. It's ironic, being in a housing crisis, that the city of Portland didn't know that. So I don't know if I'll need to hire a California investor to help me identify properties in Portland, but I find that troubling. I also want to remind your audience that we didn't have a housing crisis until white middle-class people could no longer afford to live in Portland. When 10,000 African-American families were displaced between 2000 and 2010, nobody yelled crisis. And so you need someone who understands the history of Portland, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and how redlining and how gentrification has impacted significant communities. I live in East Portland. We don't have sidewalks or streetlights yet.
Ms. Valderrama.
So, you know, housing policy is one of the areas that I already am working on in City Hall. And when I talk about affordable housing, I talk about it as in the full spectrum of the lack of affordability in the city of Portland. This is not just a rental crisis, but this is also a crisis around the lack of affordable home ownership opportunities. Lots of folks who have recently been homeless have actually lost homes. And so we have to think of the full spectrum and the affordability across the board. And so part of it, yes, is making sure that we do have new infrastructure that meets those who are lowest income in our rental units. But part of it is also preserving the affordable units, the little that we do already, in addition to rehabbing the types of units that we know need improvements, and allowing the policies like rent control and no-cause evictions to stop, so that we can make sure that people aren't displaced further.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, start us with this one, please.
Yes.
In addition to housing, what will you do to move the needle to decrease poverty?
The issue is around jobs, and one of the things that we have to do with our bully pulpit as a city council person, we have to have a very strong K through 12 system, and we have to have a very strong university system. If we're going to get traded sector businesses to move to Portland, we need to make sure that those things are strong, because they're not going to want to move their employees here if they themselves and their employees are not able to have a strong system. So that would be a couple of things that I would try to do. When folks came to me in the community and said that our high school graduation rate was abysmal, what I did was I went to work, and I have a track record. I put additional dollars in programs that serve communities of color that allow them to graduate at a higher rate. I have a track record of doing that, so I would think that doing this at the same level, on the city level, would help more people graduate from high school, and we'd have the skill sets here for people to want to bring their companies here.
Ms. Hardesty?
Would you repeat the question?
In addition to housing, what will you do to move the needle to decrease poverty?
Excellent question. I've had the privilege over the last 2.5 years to work with a coalition that's developed a ballot initiative that you will have the opportunity to vote on in November. It's called the Portland Clean Energy Fund. It is a innovative idea that came about from Apano, NIA, NAACP, Portland Branch, Sierra Club, 350 PDX. The measure will increase the business income tax by 1% on large retail operations with $1 billion national sales, $500,000 sales in the city of Portland, raise a pool of resources right around $35 million. I'm talking really fast because I don't have a lot of time. And the $35 million will be invested in creating a green workforce for those who've been left out of the economic engine, people of color, low-income people, ex-felons. I'm so excited about this initiative. It's going to be a game changer in the city of Portland, and there will be family living wage jobs.
Ms. Valderrama.
So a little proud mom moment here. My daughter is trilingual. She will be growing up in the David Douglas School District, but I know that she is not unique actually in her class. The majority of her classmates are in fact also multilingual and trilingual, and wouldn't it be a missed opportunity if we're not leveraging all of this skill set in language and cultural competency in our workforces in the public sector and the private sector? This is what we talk about. This is what I talk about in terms of new jobs, but we also need better jobs. We need people to not be working 40 hours a week and still barely making it. We need to make sure that the majority of their incomes are not spent on something that they don't have the opportunity to invest in. And ASME agrees that I am the best candidate here to represent working class individuals, to make sure that I will continue to fight to make sure that this affordability crisis that we're in has leadership who understands, who comes from a working class background, and who is willing to make the commitments and the investments to on this.
I'm sorry. You all need to take a breath. You can get a lot into those 60 seconds. Mr. Emmons.
In 2013, I made a book at the request of the mayor to look at how the city could help the school district raise graduation rates. So I made a book called 80% in 4 years. It was requested by the mayor to show how the city could act as a coordinator and a collaborator and bring people together, make kids ready to learn when they got to school. That book was kind of thrown in the wastebasket at City Hall. I wanted, obviously, not do 80% now. I wanted to aspire towards 95%. We need to raise our graduation rates to that level across the school district. I'm a big fan of CTE. In high school, I really got involved in woodworking. Right now, you talk to contractors, and housing's really expensive right now. And one of the reasons housing is really expensive is there is a lack of people who can be in the trades. So I want to work on that as well.
Now, of course, I told you 60 seconds, and here goes one of those lovely ones to answer. Ms. Hardesty, you'll start us off. This is an audience question. I am concerned about some really bad investments of taxpayer money, such as the Wapiti Jail, the coverings of the Tabor reservoirs, demolition of housing for energy efficiency. Question, what experience do you have with large financial decisions?
It's a great question. As a former state legislator, I had to look and actually track the state of Oregon's budget expenditures and budget requests and how the budget was put together. When I was on staff with Bev Stein at Multnomah County for a decade, I also had the same responsibility. I've also run a community-based nonprofit where I had to raise $450,000 annually and then manage that money. I also am a small business owner, so if I don't work and I don't manage my money, I don't eat. What I know is that I don't need to know everything there is to know about everything. I just have to know how to connect with people who have the expertise to supplement information that I will need. I am known as a collaborator. I am known as someone who can bring people together from diverse backgrounds to solve very complex problems. And one day I'd love to talk about the history of Wapato rather than the end of Wapato. Thank you.
Ms. Valderrama.
So as a David Douglas School Board member, a significant part of my role is to oversee and review our $183 million budget. We are currently in the middle of our budgeting process, which I work in tandem with our budget committee on, and I'm the only one in this race who has had already, again, direct experience working with the City of Portland's budget of just over $4.7 billion. And when we're talking talking about such a large budget, it is important when we're having these conversations around decisions that are being made in both of these roles. I am a big advocate of community engagement along the way, not just in a council room, but all the way before and even before a planning process takes place. I believe firmly that our community members have to have access to budget decisions and the process of developing them, and that includes making sure that we are providing the right types of services, interpretation, daycare and food, et cetera, to make that possible.
Mr. Emmons.
Fortunately, I built a little home office because little did I know in 1997 I was going to be starting one of the most significant architectural firms in Portland with one little computer. I grew that into, in about 3 years, we were doing South Waterfront. I was the master planner for that, and on to a lot of large planning projects and building projects, many of them with the city of Portland. I know how to run a small business. I also know how to run very, very large projects. I worked on South Waterfront, which is a multi-billion-dollar project, Portland Downtown Waterfront, which is also multi-billion, and then most of my projects were very large. I worked on a lot of housing projects, and so I was managing big teams and my own team. I've had 50 employees within my firm through the years. And so I'm from the private sector, I'm from the real world, and yet I've done a lot of work with the government, and I've had a box seat to what we can do right and what we can improve on.
Ms. Smith?
I've been a county commissioner for the last 8 years, and I have balanced and approved almost a $2 billion budget every single year and been very effective at it. I've passed over 70 resolutions and budget amendments that support young people, seniors, and mental health and homelessness. I've directed hundreds of thousands of dollars to the effort of homelessness. Prior to coming here, I worked for Senator Wyden for 21 years. I did his appropriations that was actually a multi-trillion-dollar budget. So I have a track record behind me. I've done it. I'm not talking about it, not as a policy person, but as an elected official. And I've been required to talk to people in the community to identify their priorities. And I was the only one on my board who voted against that disastrous steal of a deal of Wapato because I knew that it had no return on our investment. It cost us $58 million to build, and we gave it away for $5 million, and that was just unconscionable.
Next question, and we'll start all over again. In a major earthquake, unreinforced masonry buildings are in danger of collapse. The City Council will consider a mandatory retrofit on May 9th. Question: what factors would you consider in deciding how you would or will vote on such a policy?
One of the things that I always take very seriously before making any decisions is hearing directly from those who are most impacted. And so when we have this conversation around unreinforced masonry, to me, this is already a conversation that needs to have tenants at the table, folks who are living in buildings that are built of unreinforced masonry. This is another conversation that we do have at the school board, as a lot of our facilities are likely to not withstand the magnitude of an earthquake that we know we are overdue for. And so the long-term planning is really important to engage our youth and our families, and the same is true in this scenario. Before making any decision, it's important to me to hear how any construction or new development would impact them directly, and how to make sure that we are preserving their homes, and also making sure that we are addressing this need to make sure that we are a resilient city.
Mr. Edmonds?
When I was down in Los Angeles for 7 years before I came back, I went through the Northridge earthquake. And not only did I experience it and saw what it was like to be through an earthquake, but I also saw the aftermath and what happened to many unreinforced masonry buildings. Fast forward to Portland and my firm, I worked on numerous historic projects, one being Deschutes Brew Pub, one being the Smith Block in Old Town, and I have done seismic bracing on many, many historic projects. So I know what's involved, and I know how much it costs. As relates to this bill, I want to delay it because We are in a housing crisis. I am very concerned that this bill will take more units offline, and right now we can't afford to do that. I absolutely want to reinforce our buildings, but we got to get our hands around the housing crisis before we address this.
Ms. Smith.
Right. I believe that we do need to support making sure that our buildings are earthquake-proof. But what I do know is when this whole issue came up, Ms. Valderrama's old boss, Steve Novick, he's the author of this bill. There was no conversation. The stakeholders did not come to the table. I've talked to many property owners who said they wanted to make sure that their voice was heard, and their voice was not heard. And so for me to be able to do an unfunded mandate and not give people or residents an opportunity to have some sort of resource from the city to help them do this. I've talked to people, they can't get funding from the banks for it. So we need to figure out how do we take some of our one-time only money to help folks get this fixed and prepared, because they're just not prepared for it at this point.
Ms. Hardesty?
Thank you. I think it's important that this plan embraces the different communities that would have to be impacted by earthquake preparedness. Clearly, when I lived on 167th, we knew people throughout our neighborhood who could turn off the gas main, who could provide medical assistance. We knew what strengths we had in our neighborhood, because what we know is government will take them a little while to get there. But on a bigger scale, talking for the city, we have to make sure that we're not unduly burdening people, homeowners, small business owners, so that we have to partner with them. I think that we have not done an effective job of bringing businesses, neighborhoods, grassroots community, renters to the table to develop a plan that works. And I think that my initiative will assist us in trying to help build those community government partnerships.
Okay, new question, Mr. Emmons, start us off. If elected, sorry, I'm stumbling over the handwriting. If elected, will you be supportive of the Portland Small Donor Match Program to help us with distortions of our elections?
Well, we're probably in the last election where we have to private fundraising, and in 2020 we will have public fundraising. I could, after what I did today and other days, it would be really nice to be out talking to the people and not fundraising. I have a concern. I do support publicly funded elections, but I have a concern about the money that's spent, the public money that's spent on the elections. How many housing units are we not going to build if we do publicly funded elections? So there needs to be a balance there. I want to keep a very limited amount of money going into our elections because we need to focus on our priorities.
Ms. Smith?
Yes, not only do I think that we need to fund local races, I think we need state campaign finance reform. And until we reform all elections, doing this in a piecemeal kind of way, it just upsets everything. Everybody should be on the same level playing field. And if I'm paying taxes, I'll have no problem with our tax dollars going towards publicly funded campaigns. I'm like Stewart. I'd much rather be in forums like this, having you ask me questions and understanding where I sit on different issues, because when you have to spend 5 hours a day to pay for these very expensive ad campaigns to get your message out, it's just not doable. And particularly for communities of color who have not been in the infrastructure to begin with, how do you make those relationships to make sure that you have those dollars that you can use to run a campaign? It is unconscionable the amount of money that it costs to run a campaign.
Ms. Hardesty?
Thank you so much for that question. I have been a strong champion of public financing since back in the voter-owned election days. I understand that I would much rather have regular people fund a campaign than big business special interests. You can tell if you go to the Secretary of State's website and look at the contributions to C&E reports, and then listen to what people say. It is very clear that people can say just about anything, but I like to follow the money. And when you follow the money tells you very interesting stories. I'm proud that my campaign has been funded by regular people, from $5 donations to $5,000. The $5,000 came from my ex-mother-in-law, kept the mother-in-law, gave the husband back. And so I will always support the public financing their elected leaders rather than special interests. Thank you.
Ms. Valderrama.
So I had the pleasure of working directly with Commissioner Fritz to develop the open and accountable elections policy that we currently have in place, and worked across the table from her and others who partnered with us in making this happen, Common Cause Oregon and other parts of the coalition. It was a really exciting thing that I had the opportunity to work on. I'm a big fan of it. I do think that there's a reason, frankly, why someone like me has never been on city council. It's expensive. And it's not just in dollars, but it's expensive in the amount of time it takes away from your family. And as a working class person, that's a big risk to undertake. And so I do believe when we're talking about additional representation, it matters to have programs like this that can support those who reflect who Portland is and give us the opportunity as candidates to talk more with Portlanders and hear their stories instead of being on the phones. And so I look forward to funding this as well.
And we're ready for a new question. Ms. Smith?
Yes.
What is the Commission's role in improving wealth equity?
For the City Council? I can tell you at the County Commission, each county gets an allotment from the lottery to do economic development. And what I've done with those dollars is to create a summer paid job program that I started with 25 kids in 2011. And we've grown that program to 650 kids. Now, Multnomah County invests $2.1 million in youth employment. And now some of those youth, they now work for Multnomah County. They now have degrees, and so it works. What we do know is, over the next 17 years, every day, 10,000 baby boomers will be retiring, and we need to figure out how do we fill that gap. The other piece on how I help with that is I created an inclusive fund that gives startup money to women and people of color to start new businesses, and I think that's what we need to do as a government. We need to help those folks who can't help get access to capital.
Ms. Hardesty?
Currently, the Portland City Council controls PP's annual budget. They used to be called Portland Development Commission. I can't use the new name that they're called by. Just recently, they selected a contractor from Colorado to do the downtown post office project. I can't for the life of me understand why, if we're about building wealth in Portland, that we would hire a Colorado firm for a $1 billion program. And like PDC has a history of doing, they're making promises. Oh, there'll be plenty of jobs for people locally. Yeah, right. It never has been with PDC. They really are about extracting wealth rather than building wealth. And as the city commissioner, I will be able to have real control over their budget and help them make better decisions that really have a positive impact on Portlanders.
Ms. Valderrama?
I think a key part of building the wealth here in Portland for our families is around home ownership. We know that a lot of our communities have actually not had that opportunity. And when we talk about intergenerational wealth, this is a big missing piece for a lot of folks. And so part of my strategy is, again, making sure that in this affordability crisis that we are making it affordable. I'm grateful that I live in a multi-generational setting. There's 8 of us total in our their house, and that's the only way that we can make our home affordable, but we need to be thinking into the future as Portland continues to grow. I think the other key piece of this is directly related to jobs, looking at ways that we can incentivize folks to start a business, to stay here locally, but also look at possibilities in the public sector. At the school board, we're looking at how to align our Measure 98 dollars so that folks have the opportunity here to go into the public sector, to go into different sectors if they would like to stay in Portland.
Mr. Emmons.
Housing and schools. We have over 1,000 students at Portland Public Schools who are homeless right now. Can you imagine what kind of future they look forward to? Every kid needs to be in a safe, warm, and dry home, in a stable home. Schools. We have a lot of inequities in our school district, in our school system. We have some schools that have very high graduation rates, some less so. We have groups of kids who are way behind grade level and need to, if they even get to college, a lot of remedial work when they get to college. We need to have much more equity throughout our school districts. Every school should be as good as our best school. And thirdly, I want to talk about youth programs, after-school programs for kids of working families, and also summer programs. It's an essential part. It's about building a foundation.
Ms. Hardesty, if you'll start us on this one.
Yes.
Is city service delivery equitable? Please explain, and what, if anything, would you do to change service delivery?
No. City services are nowhere near equitable. If you live in East Portland, where there are limited sidewalks, limited lighting, limited public transportation, you will know that there's no equity being distributed in the city of Portland. I have served for the last 8 years on the East Portland Action Plan, which was organized to put pressure on City Council to actually bring resources into East Portland, and we have had a lot of success in that effort. When volunteers organized collectively and developed our priorities, we have been very good at getting the City Council to support those. Thank goodness Mayor Sam Adams realized that we were paying into a system that we weren't benefiting from. We have a lot more inequitable distribution of resources that I will prioritize, because that's where I live, that's where my neighbors are, that's where people are most impacted, and they're the furthest away from City Hall. Thank you.
Ms. Valderrama.
No, I don't think that the services are currently distributed in an equitable way. One of the priority issues of mine, again, is transportation infrastructure. For that reason, I do think that we are living in a Portland where it is unsafe to walk. And when we are living in a community where I am scared about being able to bring my daughter with me because we don't have sidewalks, because there's poor lighting, there's this big yellow sign around the corner that says unpaved road ahead, that's a problem. And so we have to make sure that we're thinking more intentionally about providing these safety improvements in addition to maintenance that's needed elsewhere. I also think parks, when you look at Outer East Portland, is another service area that is underfunded. We don't have a park in my neighborhood. And an additional thing that I'll say is grocery stores. I worry as we develop where we're developing, the lack of grocery stores is a problem. We're talking not only about transportation or housing infrastructure, we have to be thoughtful about what amenities are close so that folks have access to good food, good jobs.
Mr. Emmons.
No. I want to talk about some of my projects. I've done a lot of projects for the communities of color throughout my career, one being the Whitaker School site, where we did affordable housing combined with a new K-8 for the housing organizations of Color Coalition. And we took it to the city, and the city turned it down while other projects, especially on the west side, were moving forward. I did projects out in Lentz with Portland Development Commission, and just now, about 15 years after I worked on them, they're starting to build projects out there. And I've also done a lot of work up on the Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard districts up there. And again, I found projects just take too long, or they languish, or they just don't happen at all. So there absolutely needs to be more equity in the city projects.
Ms. Smith.
Could you repeat the question again, please?
Is city service delivery equitable? Please explain. What, if anything, would you do to change service delivery?
Couple services. I often wonder why we don't have more accessible parks. There are more off-leash parks in the city of Portland than there are playgrounds that are accessible for families who have disabled children. Everyone needs to be able to experience our city services. And so in terms of equity, I would work really hard like I did with the Cully site. It will be a Cully Park, and I put additional dollars from the county from a public health standpoint to build that park, because I know how important it is to make sure that residents have an opportunity to have physical fitness in their neighborhood. And I'll be taking an equity lens, looking at all of our parks, making sure that we have the proper trails and that we have access to playground equipment for all of our families in Portland.
New question. Where did I lose it? Here we go. How would increasing the minimum wage help the poverty rate? Wouldn't raising the minimum wage cause the price of living to go up? Ms. Valderrama?
So again, when I talk about the housing and homelessness crisis, to me, it's one of affordability. When we have folks who are working 40 or 50 hours a week and still barely making ends meet, that is worrisome. So we have to think about making sure that we have the opportunity for someone to not spend the majority of their check on housing. We also know that the second highest cost to a family after housing is transportation. So we need to make sure that we are also providing good transportation alternatives to a car, which we know long-term maintenance can be expensive. I do think that increasing the minimum wage is part of that solution, but we need to make sure that folks have the opportunity to eventually be able to save or provide for educational expenses if that is something that they need or want in their family. So this is a comprehensive approach to making sure that it's not just the floor minimum wage, but also looking at how folks can go through their careers.
Mr. Emmons?
So on my annual trip to McDonald's last month, I talked to the person behind the counter who was making minimum wage, and she was homeless. She had no home, and she had a job. A minimum wage will pay about, if you figure 30% of your income, $585 a month rent. Would everybody please go find me a few apartments at $585 in this town again? There is a great divide between income and housing needs to be at 30% of income for quality of life issues, and it's just the right thing to do. So we need to work on housing, and we need to get people's incomes up. So some of that has to do with minimum wage, but it also means getting better, higher working wage jobs in the city of Portland.
Ms. Smith?
Yes, minimum wage would have to be $25 an hour in order to be able to afford rental housing and or even to support purchasing a house, even through FHA. So it's not about the minimum wage. It's about making sure that we can have a climate in this city that we can attract new business and that we can have those wages go up and train and educate our community so that they can have those home-owning wage jobs. That's what I support, home-owning wage jobs. And if you do that, you won't have gentrification, you won't need the 25,000 affordable housing units, you will have jobs in this community, and that's where it's at for me. I'm going to be looking at opportunities to bring in new business that's going to have living, home-owning wage jobs.
Ms. Hardesty.
I would certainly support raising the minimum wage. Our current minimum wage has not kept up with the cost of living. In my neighborhood in East Portland, the people you see on the freeway overpass begging for money are all over 60, and it's not rocket science. It's the fact that when your rent continues to increase and you're living on a fixed income, the only wiggle room you have is food and medicine, and that's what they're on the freeway overpass begging for money for. The city of Portland has not done an effective job of actually getting the results that they say they want from the contracts that they currently give out. I used the example of the post office downtown. It's just unexcusable that we would have $1 billion in contracts and they would leave the city of Portland, and we would not be hiring Portland companies and creating internship opportunities and actually hiring locally to make sure that we benefited from that redevelopment. So once again, we won't benefit, Coloradans will benefit from that.
Thank you. New question, Mr. Emmons, start us off. What will be the challenges to working in City Hall with the other commissioners, and how will you handle these challenges?
I know most of the commissioners, in fact, I know all the commissioners pretty well. I've spent my career working with community groups and smaller groups on finding common ground. And some of my projects, we got people who disagreed with each other and saw the world very, very differently when they came to the projects. And it was my job as a leader on those projects to find common ground with people, agree to disagree on certain things, and come to something a solution that we could move forward with. And that goes to City Council as well. We're not going to all agree on things, but I think we can all agree on we've got a housing crisis. We need to get everybody off of our street, and I think we can get 5 votes for all of those things by setting the vision and getting everybody behind it.
Ms. Smith?
I think the important thing is if you have the same values as the people that you work with. Multnomah County has been great. We all have the same values about stuff, but we may have a different strategy on how to get the most vulnerable across the finish line. So the job is to make sure that when you're working with other colleagues is to make sure that you do something that they care about. You give them an opportunity to give some input. I've passed over 70 amendments, more than any other commissioner that I've ever sat with, that also fund housing, jobs, seniors, veterans, mental health services, homeless shelter, human trafficking. So you have to be able to have a wide view of what's happening in a city. You can't be a single issue person, so you can bring all your folks together and find something that you have common ground with.
Ms. Hardesty.
I am happy to say that I have an excellent work relationship with Portland City Council and Multnomah County Board of County Commissioners and Metro councilors, because I understand that Portland alone won't solve the housing crisis. Portland needs to work better in partnership with other governmental entities, and I already have those established relationships. I also want to add, since I've got like about 30 seconds left, that I am so proud that the Portland Association of Teachers has endorsed me in this race, as have ATU, the Transit Union, the Oregon State Council of Retired Citizens, and just this week, the Oregonian and the Scanner have endorsed me in this race. They know bold leadership is what the city of Portland needs right now. We don't need a status quo politician. We need a grassroots person who's going to be committed to making sure that the people with the least have a voice in our city hall.
Ms. Valderrama.
So one of the things that is really important to me is making sure that the positive working relationship is there despite a really unique form of government. So I'm really interested in exploring ways to look at districting, but not just that. It has to be a comprehensive approach and inclusive of a conversation around a city manager. Districts would still have this siloed structure of commissioners in charge of different bureaus, and so we have to look at ways that we are incentivizing that relationship building, and this is something that I've already been doing over the past 6 years, is building these long-term positive relationships with the current council members, because it's not just about the current vote in front of us at the table trying to get 3. It's actually about looking at that long-term relationship to get past the current vote and making sure that we're continuing to leverage a strong working environment that is effective, that is addressing the vision of the city and the needs of the community.
The constraints of time dictate again that we are at our close, so we'll go to our closing statements. And Ms. Smith, would you start us off, please?
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, League of Women Voters, for having this, because this is what democracy is all about. Being able to talk to your community at all levels, students, adults, business people, seniors, because we all live in this city together. I have a track record of working really, really hard in this community for the most vulnerable. I am a fighter. I am someone who is going to be bold, who is going to give you a vision. I understand the complications and the implications of people when they don't have a place to live. I was the only commissioner at this commission who was willing to stand up and say, no, we will not sell Wapato. We will make it a homeless shelter. I'm not afraid. I am a collaborator, and I do understand that in the future, we're going to need someone who has a vision that includes everybody. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have an equity lens to make sure that I'm making sure that everybody in this community can prosper.
Ms. Hardesty?
I want to thank you again for doing this forum. It has been my absolute pleasure to be here this evening. I am a vet. I'm a former legislator, 3-term legislator. I served for the chair of Multnomah County for over a decade. I've run a community nonprofit. I brought the NAACP back from almost extinction. My best skill, even when I'm not being paid, even when I don't have a title, is bringing people together to solve very complex problems. Everybody doesn't agree with everything that I think. I don't know why. But the good news is we work on the things that we agree on, and we move forward. I would be honored to have your vote. I would be honored to have your support, and I am very grateful again that you chose to be here this evening when you could have been out enjoying the sun. Thank you.
Ms. Valderrama.
So again, my name is Andrea Valderrama. I'm running for Portland City Council position 3, and I'm running because, again, we are in the midst of a very fast changing new Portland, and with this new Portland, we need leadership who is invested in it long term, who sees the future that we can develop by building partnerships, by leveraging community around us, and by making those hard decisions when they need to happen. I, again, currently serve in City Hall as a senior policy advisor and on the David Douglas School Board in Outer East Portland. And coming from a background of a working class immigrant community or family, it is so important to me that we are looking at what is the decision that we're going to make here with this election? What is the message that we're going to be sharing about this future Portland? I hope that it's one, I believe that it's one of excitement and energy of this growing Portland. So thank you.
Mr. Emmons.
Some of you will go out tonight and say, hey, does Stuart Emmons ever talk about anything besides housing? And I would say rarely, because a safe, warm, and dry home is the foundation of a successful city, a successful life, and should be our top priority. 3 years ago, our mayor declared a housing emergency. And where are we today? We're in worse shape. There are good candidates at this table, but I am the one who has the experience and knowledge to move us beyond our homelessness and our affordable housing crisis.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for this panel. We will have a short break before the next panel, which is for Metro Councilor Districts 2 and 4. We thank the candidates for participating. It's not easy being up here. The Interfaith Alliance for Poverty for co-sponsoring, Metro East Community Media for recording, and all the volunteers for helping. Please check our website, lwvpdx.org, to view all our forums and for TV replay information. For more primary information, pick up the Voter's Guide, at your local public library, New Seasons Market, Meals on Wheels Dining Center, or go to vote411.org. Election Day is May 15th. I feel like I should be back in school asking class to please sit down and be quiet yet. As in all Oregon elections, you will receive a mail-in ballot. Ballots must be mailed early or delivered to an official drop-off site anywhere in Oregon no later than 8 p.m. on Tuesday, May 15th. Be informed and remember your vote is important. Not only your vote, but please try to make sure that your friends, families, neighbors, and your classmates that you now can talk to also vote. Thank you.